Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Syria, at least 15 people, including a child, have been killed in Russian airstrikes near the town of MARTYR in Idlib. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says the strikes hit an area where displaced civilians were gathered. It said the death toll is likely to rise further as many wounded are in critical condition. Meanwhile, the presidents of Turkey and Russia are meeting in Moscow with hopes of reaching a ceasefire in Idlib. The talks follow a surge in fighting between the Turkish and the Syrian forces in northwest Syria. In recent weeks, dozens of Turkish soldiers have been killed in Idlib, after which Ankara launched a direct offensive against President Bashar al-Assad's regime. Ankara wants Assad's forces to seize an assault on Idlib and pull back behind lines agreed under the 2018 Sochi deal with Russia. Meanwhile, Moscow says Ankara is violating the deal by supporting illegal armed groups in the embattled province. EU member states say the bloc strongly rejects what it sees as Turkey's use of migrants for political gains. This comes after Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's government denied it was using the threat of a migrant wave to blackmail the EU. In a statement agreed on at a ministers' meeting in Brussels, the states said the situation at the EU's external borders isn't acceptable. It said the bloc will take all the necessary measures in accordance with the EU and international law to prevent illegal border crossings. Ankara wants Brussels to step up support for refugees from Syria and Turkey's increasingly intense confrontation with Damascus. But EU members insist Turkey must stick to a previous deal in which it agreed to prevent refugees and migrants from crossing into Greece. Syria says it has shot down Israeli missiles over the country's southwest Quneitra province. State media says the missiles were launched from the airspace above Lebanon and the Golan Heights. Officials say none of the Israeli projectiles reached their targets. There have been no immediate comment from Israel. Since the start of Syrian war, Israel has carried out hundreds of strikes on the country's territory against what it calls Iranian and Hezbollah targets. The International Criminal Court has ruled its prosecutor can launch an investigation into war crimes committed in Afghanistan. The ICC's decision will allow a probe into alleged atrocities committed by the Taliban, Afghan government forces, and the US. Last year, the World Court rejected a demand by its chief prosecutor to look into the crimes committed in the country. The human rights groups called the decision a blow to thousands of victims in Afghanistan. The US had welcomed the decision, and its officials also opposed the demanded investigation.
That the prosecutor is authorized to commence investigation in relation to alleged crimes committed on the territory of Afghanistan in the period since 1st May 2003.
The court's judges in The Hague are now set to decide on an appeal by the prosecutors against the initial decision. Now, moving on, the Taliban say they have no secret document or pact with the US under the Doha peace deal. In a tweet, Taliban spokesperson Sohail Shaheen said some fake documents and propaganda being spread by self-serving outfits are far from reality.
Spokesperson said all the details of every part of the agreement have been shared with the media. Meanwhile, U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad has met Taliban leader Mullah Bardar and discussed the next steps of the deal's implementation. In a tweet, Khalilzad said the two agreed the purpose of the agreement is to pave the path to a comprehensive peace in Afghanistan. Khalilzad also met Afghanistan's chief executive Abdullah and discussed the progress on Kabul's delegation for intra-Afghan talks. The envoy called on all Afghans to put the country first and not to lose the historic opportunity. Meanwhile, NATO has warned of a long, hard road to peace in Afghanistan after recent attacks. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says Western forces will only leave Afghanistan if the Taliban keep to their commitment to reduce bloodshed.
The agreement that was signed on Saturday was an important first step, but it's only a first step. The road towards peace will be long and hard. And we have to be prepared for disappointments.
Under the agreement, all foreign forces will withdraw from the country within 14 months if the Taliban guarantees security and pledge to hold talks with the government.
The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom says India's Citizenship Act denies minorities their legal rights. 77 people have been killed in India in countrywide protests against the act in the last 3 months.
At a USCIRF hearing in Congress, experts warned Indian Muslims face risk of expulsion and persecution by both government and non-state actors. Indian scholar Ashutosh Varshney told the panel, Modi's government's law is against the inclusive definition of citizenship. He said something deeply injurious to the Muslim community can happen once their citizenship rights are taken away.
Using the Citizenship Amendment Act, the National Registry of Citizens can render stateless a large number of Muslims, even if they were born in India and have lived in the country for decades, as have their ancestors.
Meanwhile, Sikh lawmaker MPs Tanmanjeet Singh Deshi and Preet Gill Kaur slammed the Indian Citizenship Act in the UK Parliament. They said the act brings back painful memories of 1984. In India, the demonstrations against the controversial act continue. Despite the deadly New Delhi riots and looming threats of violence. Notwithstanding threats from Hindu radicals, women refused to end their sit-in at Shaheen Bagh until the withdrawal of the law. Another all-women sit-in in Mumbai Bagh, in India's economic hub, also continues against the act. Elsewhere, the cabinet of Andhra Pradesh state has passed a resolution against the Citizenship Amendment Act. State Chief Minister Jagan Mohan Reddy said the government will introduce the motion in the upcoming assembly session.
Indian troops have martyred another Kashmiri youth in occupied Kashmir's Baramulla district. Occupation forces martyred the civilian during a cordon and search operation. The civilian, identified as Omar Subhan, was targeted in the district's Sopo area. Occupying forces have martyred 32 civilians in the valley in the past 2 months. The valley is reeling under India's curfew for the last 214 days. The Freedom in the World 2020 report has ranked India amongst the least free democracies in the world. The forum says clampdown in occupied Kashmir and controversial Citizenship Act are the main reasons for the lowest ranking. In the report, the body ranks India at the 83rd position, along with Timor-Leste and Senegal at the bottom of the table. It said India's score fell by 4 points. That is the worst decline among the world's 25 largest democracies this year. The US-based body said the Indian government has distanced itself from the country's commitment to pluralism and individual rights. It slammed the internet blackout in occupied Kashmir, terming it the longest shutdown ever imposed by democracy. The body said freedom of expression is under threat in India, with journalists, academics and others facing harassment and intimidation. The European Commission has released $34.5 million in humanitarian aid to help the Rohingya crisis in Bangladesh and Myanmar. The EU Commissioner for Crisis Management says Brussels is committed to supporting refugees and host communities in Cox's Bazar. In a statement, Janice Lenarchis said it's important to maintain support for people dependent on aid to survive. The commissioner said nearly $24.5 million will be used to help vulnerable groups and improve disaster management in Bangladesh. He said $10 million will be spent in Myanmar to help communities in the conflict-hit states of Rakhine, Kachin and Shan. According to Amnesty International, over 750,000 Rohingya Muslims fled Myanmar after forces launched a crackdown. The US has accused Russia of violating the Open Skies Treaty that is designed to improve transparency and confidence between both the militaries. Defense Secretary Mark Esper told a congressional hearing that Russia was blocking the US from conducting military exercise overflights. Esper said Moscow denied flights over the Baltic Sea city of Kaliningrad and near Georgia as permitted by the 18-year-old agreement. He said he had raised the issue last month in the meeting with the NATO defense ministers. The deal allows the country's military to conduct limited surveillance flights over another each year on short notice. The aircraft can survey the territory below, collecting information and pictures of the military installations and activities. In the US, California has declared a state of emergency after the state's first coronavirus death, bringing the country's death toll to 11. There are now at least 150 confirmed cases in 16 states. Meanwhile, the virus has raised threat levels across the world, forcing unprecedented measures. More in this report.
Governments around the world are scrambling to contain the new coronavirus as it spreads to more than 80 countries now. The death toll in the US continues to rise. The US National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease says they are weeks away from developing a vaccine, but it won't be ready for public use for another 18 months.
The phase 1 trial is 45 individuals. Phase 2 trials are hundreds, if not a couple of thousand individuals. It would take then about a year to a year and a half to be fully confident that we would have a vaccine that would be able to protect the American people. And so although the good news is we did it fast, the bad news is that the reality of vaccinology means this is not going to be something we're going to have tomorrow.
Saudi Arabia has extended its suspension of the Umrah pilgrimage, while more than 300 million students worldwide will spend weeks at homes as the country shut schools over the deadly disease. Italy's education ministry has closed all schools and universities in the country until March 15th to help combat the spread of COVID-19.
As you know, there has been an ongoing evaluation about whether or not to close the schools, and for the government this was not an easy decision. We have waited for the opinion of the Scientific Technical Committee, and we have decided prudently, since the epidemiological situation is changing rapidly, to suspend educational activities outside the red zone until March 15.
Meanwhile, China is seeing a rising recovery rate of the disease, with over half of the patients in the epicenter of Wuhan cured. The country has reported 31 more deaths, taking the country's overall toll past 3,000.
Meanwhile, the high demand for protective masks shows no signs of slowing down as the new coronavirus spreads around the world. Pharmacies are reporting shortages as factories try to meet the demand by increasing output. Retailers are also running out of other items such as disinfectant hand wash gels. More in this report.
Before the coronavirus outbreak, China was the world's center for face mask production. But the country's mask factories are now catering to China's needs, and with global demand rising, other countries have had to pick up the ball. This factory in Brazil has upped production by 25%, but still cannot keep up with new orders.
Our production increased by around 25% for the capacity that we have today, but the demand was very high. It's even difficult to say what the numbers were. Management had inquiries from all over the world. We continue to prioritize production and service for our local customers from the national industry, but the demand comes from China, Europe, North America, and Asia.
The WHO has raised alarm over the situation, saying there were no longer enough masks to protect health workers and infected people. Medical workers worldwide are also urging people not to engage in panic buying.
We have put orders into the big suppliers because we have requests from really ill patients who actually really have to protect themselves. Those are the important people.
Meanwhile, pharmacies around the world are also running short on other supplies.
We don't have any disinfectant gel at all at the moment. You can't find it anywhere. We're not being shipped any. There's a shortage everywhere.
Prior to the coronavirus outbreak, China could produce up to 20 million masks a day. Today, its local demand alone stands at around 50 million a day, with many factories shuttered down. As such, there is no easy solution to the shortage of masks.
More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Pakistan, 8 people have been killed and 8 others injured in rain-related incidents in the northwestern province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The Provincial Disaster Management Authority has warned that death toll could rise. A woman and 4 children are among those dead. The authority said that deaths occurred after 3 houses' roofs collapsed. It said rescue authorities have been directed to launch an operation for the rehabilitation of the accident sites. The Disaster Management Authority said the situation in the affected areas is being monitored closely. 29 people are now known to have died in flooding and mudslides across the state of São Paulo in Brazil. Hopes are fading as rescue workers search for 25 people who are still missing. Authorities say the search operation remains ongoing in the cities of Guarujá, Santos and São Vicente. They say most of the missing are residents of the hillside favela of Vila Biana, where homes fell apart under the force of mudslides and rain. Local government said 2 firefighters were killed in rescue attempts in São Paulo state. In the Egyptian region of Nubia, a love of crocodiles goes back to the days of Egyptian pharaohs. Today, Nubians raise them as tame pets to attract the tourists. This report tells you how they exactly do it.
Nubia in the south of Egypt is a land with a very long history, which includes a fascination for crocodiles. In the past, they were worshipped and mummified. Now they are domesticated and kept as pets. In Gharb Sohail, a village beside the Nile in southern Egypt, a baby crocodile sits on Mamdouh Hussein's shoulder. This, unsurprisingly, brings in the tourists, and that is the idea. Tame crocs bring in the tourists who spend their money here.
We bring up baby crocodiles and raise them to grow up near Nasser Lake. We raise them since they are babies, so they grow up with us and their aggressive nature is tempered. So they would be similar to any other pet that we might be raising at home.
Keeping crocodiles became a way to supplement incomes and promote their heritage. Victors snap selfies with the lounging lizards, while villagers regale them with Nubian folk tales. A stuffed crocodile on the door of a house shows that the homeowner keeps the large reptiles as pets.
The average lifespan of a crocodile ranges from 70 to 80 years. And as they grow older, they could reach a length of 3 or 4 meters. The owner slaughters it and mummifies its body and then puts it in front of his house as a decoration to attract tourists.
Nubians have a tradition of crocodile taxidermy, going back thousands of years, one they still maintain today. And the way they do it now remains true to the centuries-old techniques.
European stock markets are trading lower as investors continue to wrestle with uncertainty despite stimulus hopes. London's FTSE 100 is trading over 0.5% lower after Capita stocks plunge over 15%. Evra stocks fell over 10%, while ITV shares lost 5.5%. Frankfurt's DAX has lost a fraction. CAC 40 in Paris is trading marginally lower. In Asia, Hong Kong's Hang Seng led the gains, closing over 2% higher after shares of the life insurer AIA soared nearly 3.5%. Shanghai Composite gained nearly 2%. Meanwhile, international Brent crude oil price pared early gains and is trading over 0.5% higher. And now the weather situation from around the world. That's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.